Hello, I'm Tiamara Williams and we are Under the Covers, exploring people of influence who are shaping our nation. And today I have a wonderful guest, the Honourable Ian Mckelvie, MP. Okay, so I'll just get started. I've got a bunch of questions and we're just going to chat away. The whole angle of Under the Covers is really just to explore people of influence and people who are shaping the nation. And also there's a kind of element of like understanding how the mechanics of change works, you know. So I kind of always bring a little bit of an element of that. So I'll start out, ask you a bit about yourself, and then we're going to just chat about, what's on your mind, and then I'll have, I just want to ask you things about things that are relevant to you, and of course they're all relevant to all of us because you represent the people.
Some people think that.
So today I am here with the Honourable Ian Mckelvie, MP. And Ian, you are the MP for Rangitikei, and you were also the longest-serving mayor of the Manawatu, I believe.
Well, I was the mayor of Manawatu for 9 years, and I came in a by-election and went out on one, so I wouldn't be. I'm not the cheapest mayor they've ever had.
Well, I'm really happy to talk to you today because I am really interested in the fact that your constituency is quite rural. And so that's an area that I don't know a lot about, and I think a lot of people will be interested to hear your take on life in your district. And I know that you're quite well steeped and have your finger on the pulse of the life of farmers and rural people, and I'm really interested in youth as well. So I first of all want to ask you what got you into politics.
Well, quite by chance, really. I was floating around New Zealand doing odd jobs, and I was the director of this and that, and also chairman of the Royal Agricultural Society at the time. I gave that up and went home, and our mayor of Manawatu at the time got very sick, Audrey Severinson, and she was. I'd sort of kept my distance from politics entirely, really, but I did kind of admire her and thought she was pretty good. And then a whole lot of people came and asked me when she resigned because of her illness, came and asked me if I would stand. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Audrey to have a crack at that, I might as well have a go. And so I really got there by chance to a large extent. And I stood in a by-election on her resignation, along with 7, I think, other people, including about 5 of the council that was serving at the time. And I sort of came through the middle. So that's really where I started in politics.
And what was the appeal of it for you?
Well, I think I don't know really, except that I'd been a part of a lot of things in my community. I'd been chairman of rugby clubs, racing clubs, the ANP show, and I'd also been involved in farmer politics to a very small degree. I'd had a bit of association with what was at the time the Rangitikei Catchment Board, or prior to that actually was the Rangitikei Catchment Board. And otherwise, I hadn't, other than my father, who was chairman of the Manawatu County Council, and he was a very reluctant politician as well, didn't want to be part of it. He came into the county council, was chairman of it the whole time he was there, and left and actually died shortly afterwards. So he was always interested in local politics from that perspective, and so I suppose I followed it from that point of view, really.
Right. Did you know that my great-grandfather was twice mayor of Wanganui?
Well, there you go. That's very famous, isn't it? Well, and Wanganui, of course, I think I went to school in Wanganui. I think Wanganui is a beautiful place and very underrated and has had its challenges. But it's a city that's very close to my electorate and has some influence on my electorate because, of course, the Wanganui Chronicle comes out of there, and it's probably one of our. It's a pretty good little rural newspaper, the Wanganui Chronicle, and it influences a lot of my electorate.
Yep. So you're in Parliament today. I'm interested to know what's on your mind at the moment for New Zealand. I mean, I'm not necessarily talking about Parliament today, but just generally speaking, what are the things that are concerning you or that you feel are important right now in New Zealand?
I think the things that's on my mind pretty much every day, really, the changes being proposed by this government, some of which have been in train for some time. They're just reinforcing them and taking them in a direction that perhaps I don't feel entirely comfortable with. The changes that are proposed that have dramatically will affect rural New Zealand and the population of rural New Zealand, if those changes aren't put into being in an order that can be managed by rural New Zealand economically, and that's the prime, I guess, concern I've got, because our little towns are under enough stress now, and you start to interfere in their income potential, and then we're going to lose people quickly. And so I think the changes that this government are proposing in a number of areas, and the pace at which they propose them, are right on top of mind for me.
And are you talking climate change and things like that?
The climate change has some influence, and it's certainly the cleaning up the water proposals, the environmental issues that they're talking about. And the other thing that's dramatically affecting parts of the North Island, and certainly a bit of my electorate, is the radical or rampant, I suppose is the word, planting of trees, and effectively as carbon sinks. And we're the only country in the world that enables effectively our polluters to write off their effectively pollution or carbon by planting trees and then claiming against it. And so I think that's a big challenge for my electorate, because there are parts of my electorate which are uneconomic to grow pine trees simply because the transport to port and to end processes is too expensive, and so they'll end up as carbon sinks, and that's liable to be a challenge for, I think, future generations of New Zealanders.
So what is a carbon sink?
So effectively a carbon sink is you plant a tree that then sequesters carbon. So if you're in, I don't want to pick on Air New Zealand because I rather like them, but if you're Air New Zealand, you're able, under the legislation we have in New Zealand at the current moment, to then effectively buy carbon credits or plant trees that then sequester the carbon that your plane, and I'm using planes as an example, that they effectively excrete, I suppose, or put out into the atmosphere. And so effectively you can buy a tree to write off your pollution. Farmers can't do that, interestingly, which is a big challenge for us as well, because we end up being effectively the recipients of mass planting of plantations, but are unable then to write off our part of the so-called pollution or effect in methane by planting trees, which is quite a significant concern as well. So all this stuff is sort of logical. It's just the manner in which we've put it in place is not satisfactory and quite dangerous.
Yeah, and how? So I wanted to know about that. Like, how do you get to influence that, or do you get to influence that right now?
Yes, I think we do, because at the end of the day, if the government puts a piece of legislation in place related to, so the Climate Change Amendment Act, for example, if they put that in place and they don't have the support of Parliament, it'll be changed in the future. That will undermine the confidence of international investors. It will undermine the confidence of the international community, and it will certainly undermine the confidence of our own community to some extent, because they won't be confident to make decisions based on the piece of legislation that may face change at a later date. Now, I'm not saying it would, but it's possible that it would, and that will certainly undermine its credibility to some extent. So I think it's most important that we get a collaborative piece of legislation, particularly around the climate change and the Climate Commission. It's important we get a piece of legislation that everyone can pretty much agree with. Now, we never entirely agree with it, but we want to be comfortable with it, that it can be managed from both an economic and from a sustainability perspective.
I'm surprised they're planting pine trees and not native trees. Is there a reasoning behind that?
Well, it's one of the challenges. Yes, there is, because they grow much quicker and consequently become they're a much more efficient carbon sink than any other kind of tree we could grow in New Zealand. They're a bit of a weed, in my view, to some extent, although they're also a valuable timber product, and so I shouldn't be too rude about them. But the real challenge I think we've got is we could have set this thing up a little differently to encourage the planting of natives, and if you planted natives, you'd be quite safe to assume you could plant them in places that never need to be harvested, that would add significantly to our environmental values and would provide a carbon sink for the future. So I think that we should have looked at the thing differently. It's all very well to say that now, having or knowing what's now happening, but we could have probably predicted this if we'd looked a bit more closely at it.
Well, there are a few more years to come of this planting, aren't there? So there could definitely be changes, surely.
Yes, that's right, and I think there will be some. You could just alter this slightly and make quite a difference to what went on with it. And I think the real concern is that you see these carbon credits have got a value, and currently they're pegged at $25. So there's legislation says they can't go beyond that. I think they're valued at somewhere around $20 to $4.20 or something at the moment. If they were to go to $100, then suddenly you've got a massive demand to plant trees. And if you change the settings somewhat, and it would need a significant change to the settings, but if you change the settings to encourage the planting of natives, then I think would be much more productive for New Zealand. Would also get what we term red zone land planted, which is land that can't currently be planted in pine trees and ever harvested. So it would be much preferable to plant those in native trees than in pine trees, because the old pine tree, they're a bit like us. In fact, they don't last as long as us nowadays. They've got about a 60 to 80 year life, and they fall down or rot. And so they're not really satisfactory.
Well, there's also the fact that they're not native. I mean, and native trees are part of what makes the land look beautiful too. I mean, gosh, I don't know, just pine trees everywhere.
When I live in a part of New Zealand where you wake up in the morning and your car's covered in yellow pollen, and so the house windows, and if you leave your washing out overnight, your sheets will be yellow as well. So it's not much fun, and it actually as a kind of hay fever sufferer, I even hate them even more because that pollen causes hay fever, asthma, and all those sort of things as well. And so I shouldn't be too rude about pine trees though, because they're one of our biggest income earners at the moment as well. So there is a positive side to pine trees.
Has anyone talked about hemp? Because hemp is meant to be a great CO2 absorber, and it's a great money crop too.
Well, I think hemp is a crop of the. I mean, it's odd to say that hemp's a crop of the future when I come out of the very part of New Zealand that in the beginning of the last century, its main income earner was effectively flax, which is effectively hemp. And so, if you look at the Foxton, Lower Manawatu area, it was a massive. That's what its income was, and it actually kept the port of Foxton going, and there were massive exports out of that port, and very exciting industry in its day, and we never kept it going.
I think it's an incredible thing, and in fact, you can make clothing out of hemp as well as medicine, and apparently you can even build houses with the stuff. So it's something that could be explored.
I'm sure it will catch on. Well, when I say catch on, there is hemp being grown around New Zealand at last now, and I think it will be a crop of the future.
Yeah. You mentioned water and pollution. I was reading that there's a general consensus, urban and rural, around wanting our water to be purer again. Do you have that sense as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I think everyone would like that to happen. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that we've got some challenges around our fresh water. The challenges that are interestingly have been created over probably 150 to 200 years, so it's not an easy fix. And I think that and I guess I represent the rural sector basically in Parliament, and I think every person that lives in my community wants to make our water much better than it is now. It's just how we get there. I think that's the challenge for us, and how quickly we have to get there, given that we've spent, as I said, perhaps 180 years getting it to where it's got to, and there have been significant improvements made in the last 10 or 15 years in my part of the world, particularly. The Manawatu River is a great example of that, and I think it will come pretty quickly now. So there's plenty for us to do. There's plenty of methods by which it can be achieved, but the nitrate levels are the real challenge in water, and I think that's the issue that we've got to deal with as an agricultural community. That's the issue we've got to deal with as a country.
And how are we going to do that?
Well, the current proposal is not satisfactory, which just puts a very minimal limit on nitrate levels in rivers and waterways, and that is, to achieve that, you've really got to stop work. In other words, we stop everything we do, basically. So there will be methods that we can adopt, and some parts of New Zealand that are around Lake Taupo, Lake Rotorua, both have adopted plan changes already that had been quite effective. They do challenge the income streams of I guess what you might call historic farming, but farming's up for the challenge. I think we just have to have levels that we can achieve and that we're confident that we can get to in the future, and that don't effectively put us out of business as communities and as farming people and as food producers, actually, because food producing, that's our business.
So what's the one that you love? What's the version of dealing with nitrates that you prefer?
Well, look, there's so many of them, and science hasn't. There's some that science won't have uncovered yet, but there already are species of ryegrass, for example, which are not being bred in New Zealand yet, but which are or will become available in the future, I hope, which will lower methane emissions significantly as cattle ingest it. There's forms of destocking, and the sheep industry is a great example of this. As over the last sort of 30 years, we've halved the number of breeding ewes in New Zealand, and the amount of meat exported has remained much the same. So our produce we've doubled production, the productivity of the ewe flock effectively. Now you can do that with cows in the same manner. It will be more challenging, but I'm sure we'll get there. So an increase in productivity from a less number of animals is certainly going to help. And there's also the retirement of land around waterways, the planting of trees, because I think that agriculture and animals particularly need trees around them. I mean, they're just like us. We don't like barren landscapes, nor does a cow really. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to plant trees and strategically plant trees. I'm not talking about pine trees. And obviously fencing our rivers and streams and things makes a big difference. And we've come a long way with that as well. So particularly the dairy industry have done a great job of that to date. And they can do it provided they maintain a reasonable income. And of course, we've seen the dairy price lift again today, so that they'll be in pretty good space to do some of this work, as are the sheep and beef sector, because again, we've got record prices in New Zealand at the moment. So there is an opportunity for us to do this stuff, and we can afford to do it, provided it's measured and done in a manner that's sustainable.
Do you think it's a matter of returning to more sheep farming and less cattle?
Well, the real challenge is horticulture, because that's where I think the world's food future is. The problem with horticulture is that it's a higher emitter of nitrate, particularly, than any other industry we get into. So I think that we'll see a change to many forms of horticulture. Obviously, the wine industry's become very big in New Zealand and taken a lot of land that was, in Marlborough's case, and sheep, and Hawke's Bay's case, and vegetables and other things. So we're going to see a broadening of the horticulture sector, I think, but we've got to again get our emissions sorted and get our water rules sorted, because again they have an impact on water as well. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be managed differently than it is now around our Resource Management Act, around our national water policy statements and things like that, to enable this to happen. But I think it will, and so I think that more than a change to perhaps more sheep, we're going to see a change to much broader horticulture, tree crop, and pit fruit industry and things like that.
And do you think people, I'm imagining the nitrates are a result of the pesticides, herbicides, fertilisers, is that right?
Well, they're a result of fertiliser primarily. So nitrogen, a high use of nitrogen, particularly in the dairy industry, although the sheep and beef sector have been high users of nitrogen, but the very high user of nitrogen, of course, are the vegetable growers. Right. And that's just how you grow vegetables and grow them efficiently and cheaply. And one of the big challenges of all this, I think, it's an unseen challenge, but it's a challenge that is very real for the people that live in the poorer parts of New Zealand, is that all this stuff puts more cost of living, and significantly more cost of living, on people who can't afford it. And so the people who are on our lower socioeconomic groups are the people that are most challenged by some of the stuff that we do to change behaviour, because it lifts the cost of stuff. So the moment you tax something, for example, it lifts the cost of things. And taxing petrol is the best example of it. You up the tax on petrol, and someone who's on the salary of a politician can afford to pay for the petrol, but certainly you can't if you're on a lower salary. And so that's the challenge we've got, and not just in New Zealand. That's across society.
Do you think there's likely to be more of a move towards more natural farming, like going more organic? I mean, I know Putin has said he's going to become the biggest organic producer in Europe, and obviously that is kind of the way the world is moving. Do you think there would be a bit of a move towards that?
Yes, I don't know whether I'd use the term organic, because I think that we're always going to need some aids that might not necessarily be organic, but certainly the organic producers are doing very well at the moment, and they've made great progress in the way they operate. So yes, I think we'll see farming become what you termed, and I probably would term it myself, more natural. I don't think some of our farming leaders would term it more natural, but I think we will go back to that way. We'll be much more efficient in our handling of animals and our crops, but nonetheless, I think it will be more natural. May not be organic entirely.
There's certainly a growing demand for that, isn't there?
Oh, I think the big advantage New Zealand's got is that we feed such a small part of the world population, but we're so good at what we do, and we've got to stay good at what we do, because people are fussy about where stuff comes from. And if they can, now you can get these kind of links like we're talking on at the moment. If you can show someone where their meat or their vegetables or whatever they're eating came from, and you literally can, you can almost put it on the packet now, and that's what people that pay the higher end prices want. People that pay or shop at the other end of the market, of course, can't afford, and that's the difference. You can't afford to all be in that level because it just prices food out of the market now. So but it's got some value though.
How do you find the mood among farmers at the moment?
I don't think I've been around a long time, as you could probably tell. I don't think I've ever seen farming in such a. I think the term you'd use is that they're actually doing, from a financial perspective, they've got income coming in probably better than I've seen in my lifetime. Costs have gone up significantly, but the mood is very uncertain, and so they're just not confident to invest, and that will be a challenge for this whole project, of course, because if you're going to start to change things, you've got to invest to do it. And if farmers haven't got the confidence to invest, then we're going to start to see our small towns suffer a little bit because the income just won't be coming through in the level it needs to. And so everyone suffers as a result of that, but certainly uncertainty is the way I'd describe it.
Well, it's good that they're, like you say, they're doing quite well. So at least they've got a bit of padding.
That's right. And it enables change to happen.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's important.
And what about youth moving into farming? What's happening around young people?
Well, I was at the Massey Agriculture Awards on Saturday night and actually Friday night, and it was. Well, I think it's exciting, the young people that want to be part of agriculture. They don't want to be part of agriculture in the way I came in with a handpiece in the hand and a spade. They don't necessarily want to be like that. But they certainly, I think there's a lot of potential for us to keep our young people involved. It's an industry that's struggled to attract some people, or not some people, it's struggled to attract young people, actually, in the last quite some time, really, since I was young, and that's a while. But I think that's turning around, and I think that it's seen as an exciting industry. But sort of seen as an exciting industry. The real challenge we've got in agriculture, not only in New Zealand but in the world, are fruit pickers, asparagus pickers, people to do those jobs. Milking cows is another one. So people who work in the cow sheds. That's where the challenge is, and I think technology is going to be the only way to resolve that in the longer term, and it will happen.
Yes, I heard an interview recently where they were saying there's even a robot to pick raspberries now. So I guess robotics?
Not far away. And like at Massey University itself, they're doing trials on all this sort of stuff, and the way you grow. You used to grow an apple tree and it was an apple tree. Well, now it grows down a wire and the apples drop out the bottom, and so you can almost automatically pick those. But and of course, Fielding High School, which is also in my lecture, it's got its own robotic milking machine, so the cows walk and milk themselves and walk out.
Right.
And that's an exciting piece of technology. It's expensive to implement, and it will change the way farms work. But I think that's definitely the way of the future. It's just a matter of how we get there, and we've got to have reasonable incomes to get us there, and that's sort of started to happen. Quite exciting in a funny way.
Yeah. So who are the people you're worried about in your
Interestingly, I think it's the farmers I'm most worried about, because I think they're so uncertain as to where the future goes. And so, but of course, if you're worried about them and you're worried about the ramifications of what happens to them, then the whole of our community collapses, basically, if that doesn't work. And so if you look at areas like the northern Wairarapa, where they're planting a lot of pine trees, in places like Pongaroa, where I farmed myself for a while, that community will eventually disappear into pine trees, and so that's really challenging, I think, for us. And in the same way that it happens in Tamarua as well. So the planting of trees just does away with communities effectively, and they can argue all they like that that provides jobs, but the jobs come in from outside. So you can cart a crew in to fix it, to knock a lot of trees down. You can cart them in from anywhere. And so they don't necessarily need to live in, because there's no consistency of work in one area. So they won't just live in an area and just work there. So it changes the way we are. So I think I'm a bit worried. I'm not so. If the change was certain, I would be comfortable with it, because we'd know we were going what to do to mitigate it. But we don't know, and I think that's the challenge that farmers find.
And why don't you know?
Well, I think the government has chosen to take action very quickly on a number of issues that I think haven't been thought out clearly, and that's caused doubt in our community's minds, great uncertainty, and hence the lack of confidence. Now, you could blame the 3-year parliamentary term we have.
I was just going to say that.
Another issue, but
I was going to say that if the same government got in again, then there would be certainty on a level. Oh, you probably don't want me to say that, but you know what I mean, because then at least you know, like, what they're on about. They're going to keep going on with.
I wasn't going to say it myself, but interesting. When I was involved in local government, you effectively, and I'm being a little cynical, but you get elected, you spend a year trying to find your way around the joint, you spend a year trying to change the joint, and you spend another year trying to get re-elected. And
That's right. That's
about what happens here, and so it's not really. In fact, they've taken much longer than a year to find their way around the joint. But I think that it is an interesting system, but of course democracy is what it is, and I wouldn't want to live in any other kind of environment.
Yes. Yeah. Do you ever give any thought to, speaking about rural invigoration in a sense, or degradation versus invigoration? And I just wondered about the concept of bringing in digital skills into the rural areas, because that's something that you can do anywhere, and you've got the whole world as your market, as your space to evolve in.
So we've struggled in New Zealand with connectivity because of, and our geography and our sparse population base doesn't lead to an easy solution to it. But in my own community, I've got a little town called Kimbolton, a village really called Kimbolton, which is it's quite an elevated town. So it's got a climate that's different than anywhere else. It's based on volcanic soil. It grows rhododendrons and all the stuff you find in the Himalayas. Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful little community, and they're reasonably well connected now, and they have people from all over the country who work all over the world living there. And so I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's one way of reinvigorating rural New Zealand. And of course, that same connectivity and allows all sorts of things to happen in rural New Zealand. And I suppose you're sitting wherever you're sitting in Christchurch, and I'm sitting wherever I'm sitting in Wellington, and we're doing what we're doing. And
that's right.
So you didn't have to get on an aeroplane and burn a whole lot of carbon up coming to see me, and I didn't have to come and see you. And so I think it's and I'm at the wrong end of this, but I think it's an exciting world, and there's so much that you can sort of do differently than we could ever do before. We've just got to enable it, and that's the government's role, is to enable things to happen. It's not to do things. Yes. Government's roles aren't to do things, in my view. We're enablers.
Right. Because I was thinking about that. I mean, if the trees that were being planted were beautiful, then you can keep a community going, because you can draw people in because of the beauty, and you can use the digital world to actually grow all kinds of industry that's online. It's a low footprint, and, I think there's a real case to be given for planting really beautiful trees and making the spaces beautiful, because that invigorates the rural space, in fact. And in fact, the other day I was meeting with some guys here who've got Code Club. Have you heard of it?
No, I mean, that's too modern for me.
Well, I mean, they might be good people for you to talk to, because they're actually starting clubs all over New Zealand to teach young people how to code. And so it means that from the age of 5, and it's kind of like they're trying to make it like Scouts, but you go and you learn how to code and create programs from a very young age. And they're actually really interested in getting into the rural areas because they can see it's a way of really empowering New Zealand's rural youth. So,
well, I think so. That sounds very exciting to me. But I also think that, and what we really want to do is keep our young people in rural New Zealand, because we've effectively driven them out of rural New Zealand because the opportunities have disappeared.
That's right.
And I don't mind them going away to university. That's what kids do, or going away to whatever they do. That's what you do. Well, some do. and you've got to have a reason to come home. And I think that's what we've lost, and we've lost it in the whole world, actually. And that's caused the kind of centralisation. Populations going to live in cities. And it's not really good for the world, in my view. I mean, I just think that, the little bits of, you go to Africa and everyone wants to live in a city. Why on earth would you want to live in a city when you live in a place like Zimbabwe? Well, you might do now, but a place like Zimbabwe is such a beautiful country, and yet everyone lives in a little city. We're doing the same thing here, and it's just, there's no need for it. And I think some of our towns have rejuvenated really well, though. There are a few that have done well.
Yes.
And we could well use their example.
Yeah, I mean, and New Zealand is a paradise. I've seen a lot of the world. New Zealand is a paradise. But that's why I'm very keen that the trees should be beautiful, because that is one of our major selling points. And it is actually a major way of keeping people in the rural areas, is to keep them really beautiful, a place to be. And I know in my world, so many people now actually work online. They can be anywhere. And if they can sit in a little hut in the bush and make some magic online, then they're perfectly happy to do that. More happy.
So I remember going to Europe years ago, and everyone's always complained about the subsidy European farmers or British farmers get. But actually, you look at what we've done with the high country in the South Island, where we've just turned it basically into vast scrubland, by retiring it. What we should have done was what Europe effectively pays as subsidy. But when you think about the subsidy, it's actually a beautification. It's like paying someone to mow the lawns for you. And so you go around England, for example, or bits of Europe as well, and there's no fences, but it's a beautiful part. It looks very attractive. People are still farming it, but they're farming it in a manner that's effectively got long-term sustainability and very attractive. We could have done that with the New Zealand high country, because letting high ratio and all that scrub all over it's just I can't see it ever generating or regenerating. And the reason it won't is because some of those things that have got in, and high ratio is a great example of it, just suck the moisture out and will never let another plant grow near it. And so you can't get it to revert without spending billions of dollars, basically. But you could have managed it in a form that left it being very attractive and left the people there. I think it's a bit of a way out there, my ideas about that, but it's effectively a subsidy. But of course, it's not a subsidy; it's just paying someone to mow the lawns.
Yeah. So, just one more thing about the youth. So, what's happening with youth in your area, and what are the issues that you're looking at?
Well, I don't think it's all positive. So the real challenge I think we've got in rural New Zealand, and I certainly have it in my area, is our rural high schools. Doesn't happen at the first level of school, because there are enough kids and enough resource to make it work for them. But our rural high schools are significantly challenged by a lack of resource. And the lack of resource is caused by the way we fund high schools, or fund the secondary school effectively in New Zealand. So the big high schools have huge advantages over the small ones. And the small ones are all in rural New Zealand. So if you go to a school in any part of rural New Zealand, secondary school, you're not going to have the advantages you've got by going to a school in Palmerston North, for example, because they've got such numbers. And so you look at Fielding High School, it's got 1,600 kids in it. You go to Tamaroo, it's got 340 or something in it. So massively challenged because they don't have enough kids for sport teams. So collectively, they just don't have the advantages. And that then puts a challenge on the whole of the society, because some kids with ambitious families or ambitious kids will leave town and go to school elsewhere. And so it takes competition out of the school, and the whole system just breaks slowly down. And that's the biggest challenge I think we've got with young people, and so that's not necessarily positive in areas like the Rangitikei, and certainly in the east coast of the North Island, Northland, and part of the South Island. The same thing would apply. So that's a real challenge for us with our young people in rural New Zealand. And the other challenge, I think, to an extent, is that some of the jobs that they used to be able to go into, even part time, have now gone, and so you need training nowadays to get a job. There's plenty of jobs around, but they're different than the jobs were 30 years ago. And so we just have to alter our training methods, and to get trained in rural New Zealand, again, is a challenge. You've really got to go away to a city to get trained. So we lose our young people out of our rural communities. So then the facilities are not as good as they should be, and things don't happen like they should happen. So it becomes a challenge. Having said all that, I'm also the home of Massey University, and the big Palmerston schools are all in my area too, and you see some hugely talented young people in and around those areas, and so there's a big difference in opportunity for our young, and we need to find a way of changing that, and we've struggled. Successive governments have struggled with that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. As an MP, how do you have influence? How do you cause change? How do you live your purpose out?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, I think that I'm not a person who throws my weight around. So I think that I think that my ability to influence is by retaining my own credibility, retaining credibility in my community, and therefore being able to bring that credibility to the Parliament, and then you've got to have influence with your colleagues. So it's an interesting game. I play it differently than some. I don't want to rule the world. I don't mind trying to rule the world from behind the scene, and I think that that's the game you play here. I'd have to say that in the time I've been here, I probably haven't been as successful as I'd like to be in influencing some of those things, but I think our time in opposition is a great opportunity to change that.
I wanted to ask you about that. How sorry I interrupted you, but how does it change things when you're in opposition in terms of your influence?
So, I was lucky enough to come into what I think is probably one of the very strong governments we've seen in New Zealand, certainly in my lifetime. And so you sit in the back blocks of that government, basically making sure the ministers are protected and the government's protected, and your policies getting driven through the Parliament in the manner that you want to. Now, that's all very well when the policy is relevant and current. After 9 years, it seems that successive governments, not just the national government, are challenged by that, and we don't change quickly enough. So in government, you're kind of part of the mechanism of government, and whilst you can have quick influence in small areas, which you don't get in opposition. In opposition, you've got an opportunity to reset the frame, basically, and I think it's quite an exciting time, because you can all have an influence on where the policy gets to and what's going to happen in the next time you get to the government benches, which you don't really have coming in the middle of a government term, or as I did after 3 years of government. But it is a little frustrating, particularly when you're in government and can't change stuff that you can see that's wrong, because the policy is basically set. But I do think there's opportunity in opposition, and I quite like it. And there's also, interesting, in opposition, some opportunity to influence the government of the day, even though you're the opposition. And so I think that.
Yeah. So how is it that how do you mean that you get to create?
So again, in a small way. So you can have good contacts with ministers' offices, which resolve little issues in your electorates. And I guess a prime example of that's around the mental health sort of area, which is a big challenge for New Zealand, and actually for the Western world at the moment, probably for the whole world, not just the Western world. And I think that's just because times are changing so fast, it creates uncertainty, and people, young people particularly, are challenged by that. But you can get access to services much quicker than you otherwise would. And so that's one way you do. Another way you do is that I had a bill which I was in the members' ballot, was drawn in our time in government, actually, it never got put through. That was eventually picked up by this government and used quite successfully by them. And the reason that they picked it up and wanted it put through, basically in my name, although Andrew Little put it through, the reason they did that was because it had a significant impact on what turned into the M. bovis outbreak, which needs some biosecurity, some shoring up around the biosecurity area. So the bill I had in the ballot, which was set out to to prevent stock rustling, basically, then became a very important part of the biosecurity, because if you steal some stock, put it down the road on someone else's farm, and it's got a disease of some sort, creates a huge challenge for New Zealand. So that's a way you can influence as well. And that's not the only one that the government picked up. They picked up one or two other bills from our side of the house as well. So there is ways you can influence.
Yes. So what do you mostly spend your time doing when you're in Parliament and you're in opposition? What's your primary role?
Scheming.
Nothing.
I think that well, there's some interesting. So there's opportunity to put a point of view, which then is recorded forever, basically. And so I think that's a bit of what you do. So you want to make sure that when you do open your mouth, what you say is relevant. So you do spend a bit of time talking, and you spend a bit of time in the House talking as well, which is pretty important. Then we spend a lot of time planning for the future. And I obviously spend quite a lot of time as an electorate MP dealing with electorate issues, and I have a very strong team of people support me in my electorate and here. So I have about 6 or 7 people who look after me, and that's an interesting sort of a game to play because it's an opportunity to fix people's problems, and that's what they do, basically. And they actually, interestingly, spend a bit of time fixing people's problems that shouldn't be problems, because they're basically dealing with government agencies who aren't performing as they should, which is frustrating.
Right. So how do you stay abreast of global, national and local issues? How do you keep yourself to be, on your toes with all that?
I think it becomes like life. You live that life, and so we have a very strong comms unit in our side of the house, and they, I don't know how many emails I get a day. A lot go straight into to the bin, but we get all of it. We don't need to buy a newspaper. We don't need to listen to anything, because it's all in front of us. So it's all provided for us by a strong team that work for us. So that keeps us up to date. I think the real issue, though, for us is that humans are the best way. If you don't have interaction with people, then you've got problems. And I spend a lot of my time out of Parliament just touring around the place, seeing what's going on, talking to people, and making the most of the opportunity to see people and what they're doing. And you visit businesses, you talk to people, you go to events. And
so the people who are feeding you the information, who is that? Is that your own personal research teams or media, or who is it?
A lot of it's media, but a lot of it also comes out of our research. The research team pick up the media commentary from all over the world, basically. Anything that's got relevance remotely to us, we also get everything that's relevant to me personally will come some form or other. It comes through some agency or another will turn up here. So all those sort of things come along. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to pick that sort of thing up. I find that one thing I think is really interesting, though, and it's a great challenge. It's particularly relevant now, is the challenge the media itself have got, because we don't have the research journalists and the amount of budget that the media outlets had when I started in this business sort of 18 to 20 years ago. We used to have 2 people came to every man, or 2 journalists came to every Manawatu district council meeting. Now you'd be lucky to see a journalist go to a district council meeting at all, I think, if they do, in fact. And it's not the same here, but there certainly isn't the capacity for what I'd call investigative journalists. And so you can sort of see why they get frustrated with their lives, and you see so many opinion pieces now. Luckily, most of them write opinion piece on the top of it, but there's such a lot of them. And actually, what are they? They're just a personal opinion, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yes, I feel
it's just the resource that's not available to them.
Right. Yeah, that's such a shame. How can that change? Ian?
Well, that's a discussion that's very relevant at the moment with the stuff going on with TV3. The potential sale of TV3, and in fact, the potential closure of it. I think it's very relevant for the government at the moment, and we as an opposition will have to come up with some very strong policy in this area. And so if you get back to the council, and there's been a lot of criticism of the low turnout in council elections in the last couple of weeks, but actually that's been the case for the last 15 or 20 years. So ever since they went to postal voting, council elections have been a comparatively low turnout. But it's caused because there's no publicity created for those people, either the people standing for council or for the councils themselves, other than what the council generates. And so people don't know anyone. So even in my case, the Mid-Central District Health Board, I think I only knew 8 of the 14 people who stood for it. And someone like me to only know 8 of the people on the election thing, well, that's odd, and it shouldn't be like that. I blame them. Well, if I didn't know them, who else would,
That's right. I also find, I don't know, I find New Zealand media, sometimes I'm just embarrassed because it's so shallow. It's like, there's not enough juxtaposing ideas. Everyone seems to walk along the same path and talk the same stuff and reprint what someone else said and then just say what they think, as opposed to actually, like you say, doing some proper investigation from a neutral point of view. Actually, let's go in here and find out about what's being presented by whoever or whatever, and actually look at it from multiple points of view and come to some facts. Let's present some facts. There's just far too much fiction, I feel, going on, and I would love to see that change and to become highly intelligent, discourse.
It's fascinating, really, because the best example of that is what's going on, and I suppose I shouldn't always go back to Britain, but I can't really read the Chinese newspaper and understand them. But if you, and I was in London a while ago, and it's so fascinating to read the British newspaper. It's completely different than ours. But of course, they've got a circulation of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 million. Our poor newspapers have got, in the amount to Sanders' case, I think 12,000. I mean, and you've still got the same overhead behind you. So they've got such big advantages. But I think it's something we're going to have to generate as a country ourselves, because it's most important for democracy.
It is
that we
have
a strong media. And it's probably well to criticise the media because they're always picking on us, but we deserve to be picked on, frankly. We put ourselves out there, so we deserve to be picked on. And if we say something stupid, we probably deserve someone to know about it, because that's what we are, And so I don't have any hassle with the media. I think they struggle for lack of resource, basically.
Oh, I did. The other day I was watching a documentary, and I was so shocked to find out that 138,000 New Zealanders smoke meth. Do you have an issue with that in your area?
Yes, it's a. I don't understand it, and I guess that's the challenge. I don't think our community understands it either. It's something that, although I did hear this morning, there's some statistics saying that the consumption of it's dropping, but I find that hard to believe. And I don't. I come from a generation of people who just don't get that stuff. I don't understand it. And you can smoke a bit of marijuana. It's a bit like having a beer at night, I suppose. In fact, I've got quite a lot of friends who think that that's exactly what it's like. I'm not sure it does them any more harm or good than having a beer, but some of this other stuff is treacherous, and I don't understand it. It's tragic for the young people who get involved in it, and it's very, again, commentary on in the last couple of days around the courts and how they're handling the prosecution of those sort of people. And I can see I find it interesting that you'd look at dealing with addiction in a different way, because we are not good at dealing with any sort of addiction in New Zealand, haven't been for some time. Again, that's caused by numbers. I think there's not enough people, but there's also, I don't think we've got nearly a strong enough police force in New Zealand, and that's fallen behind in recent years because of dramatic growth in our population. It's not long ago we were 3 million people in New Zealand. We're now very nearly 5 million. And so we've got to, and that's why, of course, our road deaths are up as well, because we've got so many more cars on the road than we had 10 years ago. And so it just creates a whole lot of challenges, and I don't think our society deals with some of those things very well. I think it's a community issue, though. I think communities need to deal with it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it seems incredibly complex to me, because addiction is complex. But I feel like at least, I don't know, education in schools or something like that. I don't know what's being done. Do you have any ideas, any knowledge of what's happening?
A lot being done, but I think the challenge is what happens to, and again, it gets back to the issue I was talking about earlier with respect to the schools. I think that if you're young and it's very easy to get disillusioned when you're young. I can just remember that far back. But
Mm.
I just think that if things aren't going well in school and you just don't like school, then you're going to go and you eventually get in with the wrong people and you get into trouble. And it's
Mm.
a society issue. And that's why I say, get back to the point that I think it's a community-based
Mm.
issue. And I think it's something that we need to enable communities to fix these things.
Mm.
Housing's the same. It's a community issue. It's not a government issue. Governments can't run things. Hopeless.
Mm.
But communities can.
Mm.
And we need to make sure that communities are resourced to get on top of these things. And where there are good organisations, and I have one or two in my electorate, very good ones, they deal with these things pretty well. Don't
Yeah.
fix it. They certainly fix a lot of people.
Yeah. And so, in relation to that, what do you see your role as facilitating, like people who've already decided, okay, we're going to deal with this issue? Do they bring it to you and you find ways of facilitating that in terms of, seeing what funding there might be, or how do you as an MP support that kind of thing?
So I think that there are a whole lot of there's a whole lot of policy and funding mechanisms in place now, and most of our community organisations are pretty good at dealing with that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the roles of our officers is exactly that, to help facilitate their access to those kind of funds or even just resource to deal with issues like that. So, and we do a bit of that.
Mm.
And in fact, I've got one of my colleagues coming to Fielding in a couple of weeks' time to help raise funds for one of those organisations, because he's got a particular bent in that area, and hopefully that'll be successful and makes a difference to them. But I also think that our penchant in New Zealand for borrowing overseas ideas, whilst admirable in some ways, we're just such a different society, and so one size doesn't fit all in New Zealand, because we're too small and we're too different, and I think we've got to look at it, as I said before. I think we need to go back to communities and let them enable them to fix those challenges.
Yeah. So do you see yourself as a leader or more like you're a facilitator and serving the process of people who are doing things? Like, do you instigate stuff, or you more like facilitate the implementation of things?
I think there's a role for us as instigators, and I suppose I'm a little, I'm speaking for myself, not for all MPs. I instigate a little bit of stuff, but I certainly facilitate a lot more. And so I think my role is to enable our community to achieve its aspirations, basically. And any way that I can fit into that scheme, then that's where I belong as an MP, and it works to a large extent. Sometimes you need to be out there taking a bit of a lead from a community perspective, because they expect you to. And usually that's in times of adversity or something that's not going as well as it should, unfortunately. But that's just how it is.
Yeah. And do people come to you? Do you find that your community people come and talk to you, write to you, call you? How does it work?
Yes, most of them do, and if they don't, I do. So I think that our role is to make sure we're in touch with all those things that are important, whether they're schools, whether they're health boards, whether they're just the local farming group or the local business association. I have an association with everything from unions to funeral directors to whatever, and I think that's our role. And we need to be accessible. That's the other key for us, is to be accessible, and that's what my team's out in the electorate, their role is to be me and the electorate, basically, because we clearly can't be there, because our primary role, as we're reminded often by Jerry Brownlee, is we're lawmakers. So we sit in Wellington for 3 days a week making laws, and we could do with a few less laws, actually, but that's what we do.
Yeah. What do you think the National Party could do better in future?
Oh, look, I think that we will get better. And I think we're getting very much better in opposition, and it's a good time to be united in opposition. We've got a very strong team, and so we are diverse, and so we have a little bit of everything in our caucus. And I don't mean everything, I mean we've got all sorts of skills, and I think that we'll put together some policy this time leading to the election that I think will be very positive for New Zealand, and it'll bring us up to speed. So I think when you say what we could do better, I think that we'll do as well as we can, and we'll bring policy to the fore that we think is required in New Zealand, and that we think will win us an election, I guess, and it won't necessarily be. I don't think our role is to be bringing populist policy to bear. I think our role is to bring policy that will make a difference to people's lives to bear. And so I think that we're getting there. We're getting there. We've got a strong, as I said, a strong team, and they're working pretty hard. So I think we'll come up with some pretty good stuff.
What do you think about the criticism that the National Party forgets about the little people?
Well, yes, I don't wear that at all. I think that's becoming quite apparent at the moment. I think that it's ironic in my view that much of the stuff we do benefits the small, what we call the little people, the smaller people.
Yeah, that sounded a bit derogatory, but you know what I mean.
Well, I don't like lots of words I don't like. I can't stand the word staff.
Right.
Staff, they're not my worker either. So, so what are they? They're my whatever. It's quite. I don't like either. I don't like youth either. Actually, youth is a terrible. Youth's a terrible word. Youth's a nice thing to be, but it's a terrible word because it could be taken as being derogatory. Anyway, where were we? I've got off.
Where were we? I was saying, oh yes, about how National forgets about, like I just heard it the other day, that...
I hear it all the time. And so, if you look at, and I don't want to be mean about stuff, but if you think about petrol tax, if you think about a sugar tax would be a classic example. A sugar tax would just penalise those people. It might do some of them some good, but it wouldn't do most of them any good. It's like cigarette tax, Cigarette. If I want to smoke a cigarette, I'll go and buy a packet of cigarettes. It costs me $35 or whatever, and I'll smoke one.
Yes.
But when you live on $24 an hour or whatever, and you smoke a packet of cigarettes, and every day you spend $30 of your it's 3 hours of your day basically. Once you paid your tax, gone on a packet of cigarettes. Well, that's madness, and it's the people that can't afford that are getting taxed. So I think we're probably more inclined to want to support them and to enable them to do much better. Yes.
Okay. What are your thoughts about the current conversation on freedom of speech?
I got asked that last night by quite a vociferous person. You see, I'm not precious about myself. People want to criticise me, that's fine. And I think we get a bit like that. And Massey University's been very much, and it's actually my old university, and I kind of like Massey University, very much in the news lately because it's had 2 instances where it stopped people speaking on its campus that for various reasons. I think that's very unfortunate. So I'm pretty much of the view that as long as I'm not nasty to you, I should be able to say what I like about you. And I think where I'm getting to is I think there's a point where freedom of speech becomes bullying, not rational. And that's very difficult to police that. But and I think social media has kind of prolificated that sort of stuff, particularly with our young people, interestingly. And I find it quite interesting that they haven't got, even the young bright kids haven't really got onto the fact yet that whatever they put on these living things on this thing we're talking on, it's there forever. You can't get rid of it, Right. When I wrote a letter to my grandmother, or she wrote a letter to me, the chances are I threw it in the rubbish bin or it got burnt and it was gone forever. Actually, when I was a mayor, most of the stuff I wrote to people, I wrote handwritten. I still do.
Right.
Because it usually disappears or otherwise it ends in an archive, doesn't it? But these things, they can turn up anywhere. And that's something we've just got to get used to as well. And that's what affects our ability to freedom of speech, basically, because people say things on these things that if they thought about it, they wouldn't say. If they had to write it down, they wouldn't have said it, that's for sure.
Yes.
So...
Yes, I too. I think it's very important that people are free to speak, and at the same time, we just have to learn manners when it comes to how to deliver what is important to us. But everyone should be able to express what's important to them, I think.
I think so too, and I think we're just so precious about stuff that just it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's all in the way you say it, because I can say something that someone next to me can't say, and I'll get away with it because I'm not going to have a different manner when I say it, and I think that's really important.
Yes, that's right. But like you say, I mean, we're in a stage where that ability to communicate en masse is fresh and it's new, and people will learn. I really do feel that people will learn with time. In the end, the consequences of your words will become apparent. and I think that it will find its own balance eventually, and but it scares the heck out of me, the idea of somebody else telling me, or even the flavour in the air being that it's not okay to say some things, and that's how I feel.
And I think, and this place is very interesting, of course, because everything you say is written down forever in this place, and so you're aware of what you say. And some people have got a way of saying things that are different than others, and they're quite clever at it. And and maybe we'll all learn a whole lot more, And maybe the language, whatever language we speak, is much more important than it ever was before.
Yes,
because language is everything, really, isn't it? It doesn't matter which tongue it is, but it's important.
Well, it's how we create our world. Yeah.
But I always think, I just love going on to the maraes, listening to those. They tell you all sorts of stories when you get on a marae.
Yes.
I just think it's amazing that oral history is amazing because you can make oral history what you want, really.
That's right.
Generations change it, and that's what it is.
Yeah. So if you could wave a wand and change anything in New Zealand, what would you do?
I'd change the government. That's not fair. If I could wave a wand and change anything, I think that I would try to moderate our society to be more tolerant than it is. Mm-hmm. And I think tolerance is hugely important. And just driving down the road in New Zealand is different than driving down the road in England, for example. I know I'm going about England, I shouldn't, but I do, because that was where I was last. I mean, they give way to you. You don't get given way to in New Zealand. So we're a little bit of an intolerant society. And, coming from, it's an interesting thing when you come from Palmerston North, because Palmerston North, I remember when I was at Massey a long time ago, I lived in a thing called B Block, which was infested with rats, and it's been sent away now, long since gone. But next to it was a thing called Colombo Hall. Now, Colombo Hall was a product of the Colombo Plan, and the Colombo Plan was a UN aid, I think it was UN, or one of those aid thing, really, to enable young Asian people to study abroad and to become more educated, and then consequently develop the Asian economies. They left us behind, didn't they? But we became sort of immersed in Palmerston North. We had a much broader cultural background when we were young than perhaps other parts of New Zealand, just because of the university and the fact that there were a lot of foreign students even in those days in that university. And so it's quite interesting, and that bred more tolerance. And I think if you live in, I want to skite about my part of the country, but we're quite a moderate part of New Zealand. We don't have outlandish views about stuff, and we don't do crazy things, and we work 12 hours a day basically. so I come from a part of New Zealand that I think is relatively tolerant, but there are other parts of New Zealand that aren't, and we need to change that.
Yes. Okay. Which politician in another party do you admire the most?
Oh, that's a funny question to ask, isn't it? I've always, I get on well with most people, but I think I admire the most. That's a very good question. I think Andrew Little's a person that I've always had a bit of time for. I think given the environment we're in New Zealand now, I like Andrew. He does his best, and he's got his views, and he's an ex-unionist, but that's how he is. And so I kind of like Andrew, and I think he does his very best for New Zealand. And when you come here, there's 120 of us ostensibly doing our best for New Zealand.
Yes.
Now, I think some of their best is a bit different than mine would be, but there are some people in this place that I think are very good. He's one of them.
Great. What do you love most about New Zealand?
Oh, when you go away and have a look at some other part of the world, you know what you love everything about New Zealand. I think the thing about New Zealand, the great advantage we've got is our isolation, interestingly. It protects us from all sorts of stuff, and it also enables people to come to live here and feel safe. And there's a lot of people living in New Zealand now who certainly never felt safe in their former life, and they just can't believe they're like to come here. And I think that's something we should be very proud of, that people want to come and live in our country.
Yep. And how would you describe New Zealanders in 3 words?
Well, I don't think we've got the number 8 wire mentality we used to have, but I think on the whole New Zealanders do it themselves and do it pretty well usually.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage that rather than rather than stop it. And if you think about some of the law we pass around health and safety, and I'm not saying we don't need good health and safety law, we certainly do, but some of that takes the onus off people to make sensible decisions, and we should do that, because the do-it-yourself will be gone. And that's the issue, I think, for us in government, to be very careful what we foist on people, because it does dumb them down, so to speak. Dumbs down society, really. That's not too good. Don't like that.
Yes, I agree with that. I was just recalling the other day, I went to Titahi Bay North School for a while when I was a kid, and we had the most fantastic playground. And one of the things we had was a big maypole with giant rope on it. And one person would hold the rope and everyone would go underneath, and you'd fly like way up in the air while everybody ran around, and you couldn't stop the thing unless they stopped.
Yeah, that's right. And,
and we had an absolute ball. We had a flying fox. I mean, you couldn't have that today. And it makes you strong, and it makes you able.
Yeah.
Yep. That's sad, isn't it? One of my boys, I think he had 7 broken collarbones by the time he left school. And if you did that now, you'd probably be locked up. you'd be under inquisition for sure. Because, but I think that we're just a little precious about that stuff as well. Not about health and safety work, but certainly for kids, they need to learn what's not achievable. And the only way I learned what not achievable was by trying to do something that was stupid.
That's right.
Climb a tree you can't climb, you're not going to be able to climb it, are you? So I do think that's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for society all around the world. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk with you, and it's been really interesting. And also, thanks for serving our country, because as you say, you're all there doing your best, and we love you for that.
Oh, you're kind. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Ian.